Good afternoon, everybody. We are meeting today. It's a pivotal moment for solar in New York, and especially for the communities that have a lot to gain or lose from clean energy access. There has been incredible progress over the last, really, I'd say 10 years, and has particularly accelerated over the last 2 to 3 years since the Inflation Reduction Act, with solar and it becoming more scalable and accessible to all communities. As many of us know, many of the incentives that have driven solar adoption are at risk of disappearing right now. Whether these programs will be extended or reshaped remains uncertain. So that's really why we're here. What is certain is that now is a crucial time to act. There are some immediate opportunities which property owners and communities can take advantage of, and we will go into great depth about what those are. And that's really, I think that it's in some ways a silver lining conversation that though Noah will go into a lot of what the policy landscape looks like. At the same time, we're going to talk about some ways that the prevailing incentives can be locked in. So today's panel is about navigating this uncertainty with clarity, with urgency, and with hope. It's about recognizing both the opportunities in front of us and the communities that must be centered in the clean energy transition. So as I said, it's our primary objective of this webinar that you walk away with tangible next steps, particularly around project development and also to get involved in policy. Before jumping in, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Each offers a distinct and critical perspective on today's solar landscape. Noah Ginsberg is the executive director of NYSERDA, and he's really the solar industry's policy champion, and does an incredible job advocating for better and smarter solar policies across New York State. He will lead us off by explaining the current state of solar policy at the local, state, and federal levels. I'll then follow up from Noah by sharing how building owners can lock in the value of existing incentives before they shift or disappear. Anasa Scott, a community development finance consultant and managing partner of ILE Strategies, will then frame the second half of our conversation in the context of community and international development and in the context of her extensive experience in these spaces. And David Downs, Vice President at Catholic Charities of People of Progress Development, will explain the evolution of Laudato Si, an initiative to solarize 20 affordable housing buildings in the Brooklyn and Queens portfolio. In addition to discussing project development, he will explain how his work builds from a global movement led by the Catholic Church to advance climate resiliency and justice. So with no further ado, please take it away, Noah.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Just want to make sure, can everybody hear? Can you hear me okay? Good. All right. Awesome. So I'm Noah Ginsberg. I'm the executive director of New York Solar Energy Industries Association. We're the nonprofit trade association that represents New York's distributed solar industry in New York State. So we have 235 member companies. We also represent some nonprofit organizations and trade unions, but we are predominantly companies that install, finance, build, own, operate solar and energy storage projects across New York State. Really happy to be here today. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about New York's distributed solar industry, kind of the current state of play, and then I'll talk about what's happening with federal, state, and local policy. And I'm going to be brief because we've got a great lineup of speakers and I don't want to hog the mic for too long. So a bit about New York's distributed solar industry. So this really is New York's most successful clean energy sector, really by any measure. So New York State in 2019 passed a climate law that set a whole bunch of really ambitious targets for clean energy deployment. And one of those targets was specific for rooftop and community solar or distributed solar. That's the smaller projects, not the mega utility scale projects, but projects that are either on the built environment like rooftop solar or community scale projects that are up to 5 megawatts. So again, we're talking acres, not hundreds of acres for ground mount projects. So the goal that was set for distributed solar in our climate law was 6 gigawatts by 2025. We actually surpassed that goal more than a year ahead of schedule. And we are now on track towards an expanded goal of 10 gigawatts by 2030. The solar industry in New York State employs more than 15,000 workers by the last census. It was 15,490 as of 2023. I actually think that's an undercount, just based on the growth that we've seen in the last few years. Last year alone, we built 1.24 gigawatts of rooftop and community solar. So for those of you who don't think in watts and megawatts and gigawatts, what I'll tell you is that we've built enough solar in New York State for just rooftop and community solar for more than 1 million, about 1.1 million New York households. So again, we're really getting a lot done. We have a ton of momentum, and that is the exciting part. Um, the other half of the sentence is that it is a really challenging moment for our industry. Actually, maybe before I go there, I'll just say the reason we've been so successful is because we've had strong foundational support at the federal level with a 30% tax credit for solar, which was strengthened by the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 in a number of really exciting ways, particularly for affordable housing and projects that benefit low income folks and projects that include American made components. So that has been really a boon for the industry and the work we're doing here in the state. We've also had really strong state level support. So that's net energy metering for for rooftop solar. So if you generate solar power on your rooftop, you're going to directly reduce the amount that you need to pay to the electric utility company in a one-to-one way. That's changed a little bit in the last few years, but we still, for the most part, have net metering in New York State. We have a value of solar tariff for community solar. This is community solar is a construct that allows a whole bunch of New Yorkers, maybe renters, folks who can't put solar on their own rooftop, to share in the output of a local solar project that's connected to the utility system, but not on their roof. So maybe there's a parking lot where there's a big solar project, and that solar energy system is going to inject power into the grid, and then hundreds of folks from the surrounding community will subscribe and get guaranteed bill savings. So again, we have some really great programs in New York State. We also have strong state and local incentives. And I'll talk about those very quickly before then I'll pivot into the challenging moment that we're in right now. And Rob, please stop me if I'm getting into anything that you don't want me to cover. Okay. Okay. So um, so at the state level, we have the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, has a program called New York Sun. And New York Sun provides incentives for all different kinds of rooftop and community solar projects in the state. Over the last 4 or 5 years, to comply with the disadvantaged communities benefits requirements of our climate law, NYSERDA has evolved their programs, and they now have enhanced incentives for solar projects on affordable housing and for solar projects that deliver direct bill savings to low-income New Yorkers. So we have seen a major shift in focus towards that, which has been, I would say, universally a positive development in the solar industry over the last several years. Something else that we saw in 2022 is as New York State began requiring prevailing wage for projects above 1 megawatt AC, NYSERDA offered a prevailing wage adder to help industry pay those higher wages and still make solar projects economically feasible. So that's really the vast majority of the NYSERDA budget that's supporting solar in New York State today is really going towards prevailing wage and then low income benefits. There are some other things. Historically there's been a small incentive for residential solar, although that's been phasing out over time, and it's pretty modest. And then there's also been solar for incentives for solar on businesses and some beneficial siting adders. So if you put solar on a brownfield or above a parking lot, you get a little bit of extra support from the state because, of course, the state's trying to encourage those kinds of land use, putting solar on the built environment wherever we can to preserve open lands and agricultural lands. So again, NYSERDA's got some great programs. In New York City, we have a local property tax abatement for solar. So this is something that the city established in coordination with the state more than a decade ago. And it was set to expire at the end of 2023. And I'm happy to share that we worked jointly between the solar industry and the city of New York and state legislators to not only extend it, but actually to expand it and increase the property tax abatement to 30% and to allow that to support both solar and energy storage. So again, we've got a lot of really good stuff going on in New York. We are very lucky in New York when it comes to the policy environment. All that being said, there are some very real threats that face our industry and threats that face that are going to make it harder for homeowners and business owners and community-based organizations and affordable housing providers to install solar and to lower their electric bills. The biggest threat is coming out of Washington, D.C. And that's where HR 1 or the One Big Beautiful Bill that our House of Representatives passed, or the Republicans in the House of Representatives passed through the reconciliation process last month, and that's now been kicked over to the Senate. If the House version is enacted, it basically eliminates federal support for solar projects. I mean, that's the short version. We could get more into the weeds about what it means. Some of it goes into effect almost right away for residential, for commercial, based on the House version. It's a little bit more of a phase in, but you got to get going on your projects within 60 days. So there's a lot of like uncertainty right now with what's going to happen at the federal level. What we're hearing from our good friends at National SEIA, who've been doing a lot of really great advocacy in DC, is that they think the Senate is going to moderate the bill a little bit and make it a little bit more workable. So hopefully by the end of the summer, we're going to have more market certainty. We're going to know what it looks like. Just to set expectations, I think it's not going to be as good as the current incentive structure is. And I didn't even really touch on some of the uniquely beneficial things that were in the Inflation Reduction Act for affordable housing and nonprofits, but there were bonus credits and elective pay, which means that if you can't take the tax credit because you're a 501c3 or you don't have the tax liability, you would get a check, right? Like a cash grant type option. So again, there are a lot of really smart things that our federal government did that are potentially at risk right now. So that's the federal. Then at the state level, we are at a point where we are starting. We are victims of our own success in that we are ahead of schedule and under budget towards hitting our 10 gigawatt distributed solar goal. Now, rather than saying, so the Public Service Commission, which oversees the budget for NYSERDA's programs, they are looking at this and they're thinking, okay, well, they're doing great. This is our most successful sector. Now, if I were managing a stock portfolio, I'd say, hey, that stock is doing well. Let me put more into that and get more benefit for New York families and businesses and the workforce. Our Public Service Commission, I'm glad they don't manage anyone's stock portfolio because they did the opposite. And they said, hey, we're ahead of schedule and under budget. Let's take the remaining funds that were approved for this program and let's claw them back and put them into other programs. And so that was a decision that our PSC made in April of this year. It caught everyone by surprise, certainly myself, certainly many folks who work at NYSERDA on the state's energy programs were also caught flat-footed by that decision. We know that was a bad decision. I think there are many commissioners who now understand that was a bad decision as well. NYSEA has filed a petition for rehearing. So we're protesting that decision to defund the state solar program for many reasons. If for no other reason, we're saying, look, we don't know what's coming at the federal level, but it's not going to be good. Now is not the time to be cutting state level support for the clean energy industry. Even if you're just thinking, forget about clean energy for a second, just thinking about the jobs and the families who pay their rent and pay their mortgage working in the solar industry, we owe it to them the way I put it is that New York is on collision course. New York's clean energy industry is on a collision course with what's coming out of DC, and our Public Service Commission just took away our airbag. So we need to get that back. We're fighting. We're going to win. We will find out next week, actually. They have to make a decision soon. And that's maybe most of what I can say about that. Really quickly on legislative efforts, there are a number of things that we're pushing for in the state legislature that's going to make it cheaper and easier to build solar in our state. We are pushing for reforms to the interconnection process to lower the cost to connect new solar and storage projects to the grid. We're pushing for permitting and siting reform to make it faster and cheaper to get projects through the permitting and siting process. And then we're also pushing to raise New York's distributed solar goal to 20 gigawatts by 2035, which again is going to set the conditions for us to do a whole bunch of other things and drive continued progress towards our overall clean energy goals, but also to deliver on an affordability agenda for New Yorkers. The big bill that we've been pushing this legislative session to achieve that is called the Accelerate Solar for Affordable Power, or the ASAP Act. It's Senate Bill 6570. This is the last day that the Senate is in session. So if you are looking for an action, I can drop in the chat the phone number for the Senate Majority Leader. We are asking people to make phone calls today to encourage the Senate to support solar jobs and to help lower bills in the state. So that's what I've got. I hope that's what you were looking for, Rob. And I'm really excited to hear from Anasa and David and you as well.
Thank you, Noah. That was really an awesome overview of the state of solar here in the city and the state and the landscape federally. I want to briefly take what Noah described as a shifting and complex policy landscape and discuss some actionable items, right? So a little bit of background about us, right? I run a consulting firm. We are real estate solar owners reps, so we're retained by property owners to help navigate them through solar projects, let it be engineering, project underwriting, procurement, and construction admin. In a moment like now, it's particularly important to identify what's real and what's not, what needs to be acted on today, and what can be held off. So I really want to just focus laser in on both the limitations and opportunities that are in front of us right now at 219 on June 12th. On the federal level, as Noah pointed out, the House Bill 1, the big beautiful bill, extends the existing tax credit rules for 60 days after the bill is signed into law. Now, yes, hopefully there certainly is political pushback. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we're looking at this as a worst case scenario and working to help clients through what this means. The president has a goal of signing the bill into law on July 4th, right? So 60 days from July 4th is not a long time from now. What does it mean? Again, there's 60 days to begin construction. What does begin construction mean? And there's quite a bit more latitude than it sounds, but actions do need to begin right now, right? If projects are not already underway. There is what is called safe harboring. Now, I want to say these rules are complex. We're not attorneys, not accountants. There was some great guidance put out by Nixon Peabody, among others. We'll send that around after the webinar. But to give like a high-level practical overview of the couple opportunities so you can sink your teeth into something, then it's called a 5% safe harbor test. If 5% of project costs are incurred toward construction, those can be engineering costs, but they have to be true engineering costs toward construction, not just a feasibility study. That can be 5% put down on materials under certain conditions. That safe harbor rule, right, means that a project qualifies as being under construction, and the project can then be completed by the end of 2028. Right, so there's certainly for the rooftop projects and other types of projects in the commercial space where we're working, there is ample time to complete the project. Once it's safe harbored, it's going to be a flurry to be able to safe harbor, but it is possible in the next 2.5 or so months to safe harbor. There are other tests. There's a physical work test, essentially to begin construction, manufacturing in certain capacities. I won't go into details. I'm not the right person to go into details on that. But beginning construction in a more physical form is also able to, and so long as construction is continuous in certain manners, then again, that the prevailing tax credit rules can be locked in with the 2028 completion date. So that's the first piece, and that's around the federal investment tax credit. The base 30%, as Noah said, there are opportunities. Those rules include direct pay for not-for-profits, 501c3s, government agencies to be able to take the tax credits, among other things. There is a second program which is live. There's the Clean Energy Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program. It's a mouthful of a name of a program. Essentially, it is taking that 30% tax credit, turning it into a total of a 40 or 50% tax credit for projects that are located in low-income communities, as well as projects that are federally regulated affordable housing. We have successfully applied for 83. We're 83 for 83 in our bonus tax credit applications. So Steph Curry, you can have some room to grow with your free throw percentage compared to our application rate, at least. In other words, it's accessible. It's a real program. We have successfully applied not just in the first 2 years, but this year as well. Then letters have been provided in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we don't consider it bankable the way we would have in other years, just because things are less certain in DC now than they were. But it's live. They are actively reviewing applications, and that has an application due date of August 1st. There are fewer steps to go through to qualify for that program than safe harboring by quite a bit. It's certainly feasible as of today. If the project starts in the next 15, 30 days, there's ample time to be able to lock in that, at least the applications for that bonus tax credit program as well. So those are the first 2 opportunities at the federal level. At the state level, then, as Noah said, the New York Sun program is being sunsetted, pending second thoughts, hopefully by the New York State Public Service Commission, right? So what does that mean? That means for non-affordable housing projects, to the best of our understanding, then the incentive levels will go from approximately 50 cents a watt. Let's say that covers around 25% of project cost plus or minus, right? So that will go to 0. For affordable housing, more broadly defined at the federal level, more other than naturally occurring affordable housing, pretty much every other way that we define affordable housing here in New York, city funding agreement, a whole host of regulations, right? It's pretty straightforward for what we would consider affordable housing to qualify. The state will tap into another source of funds, the Solar Energy Equity Framework. Did I get that right now? Or SEEF, more or less, close to it, right? I know it's SEEF, SEEF. They're going to tap into another pot of funds to maintain the affordable housing incentives, which are higher. They're $1.60 to $2 a watt. We don't know exactly the level where they will provide it or for how long. There's supposed to be a meaningful runway of a meaningful amount to provide continuity. That's the spirit of what we've heard. What those levels are still under development. It is possible to lock in New York Sun money, as well as the prevailing affordable housing incentives through by applying for interconnection, getting interconnection approval, and then you can go to New York Sun. That can take a couple of weeks to about 3 to 4 months, depending on the size of the project. So at a high level, it is possible to lock these incentives in. There is immediate action, specific, focused action that needs to be taken by folks who know what they're doing, who know how to go through these programs and be able to secure these incentives. But there is, as of right now, a runway pending other changes to policy that may happen in the future based on worst case scenarios. Existing incentives are still there. So at that, I think it's important to contextualize these opportunities, challenges in the perspective of community development, environmental justice, and also getting ourselves out of, sometimes domestically, there are a lot of challenges in the policy world, looking a little more globally. How does the work that we're doing in New York relate to broader global initiatives that are taking place? So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Anasa Scott to frame our conversation through that lens.
Yeah. And thank you, Rob, for pulling this together. And it's always good to be on a panel with you, David, again, and Noah. Good to learn about what you're doing to advance the solar industry. So for the community development sector, solar is crucial to the future of affordable housing, to the resilience in terms of climate resilience for low-income communities. Affordable housing is at risk for just a number of reasons. There are a number of challenges with maintaining and operating affordable housing, energy costs, just maintenance costs. Each natural disaster event puts more pressure on affordable housing, nonprofit organizations, particularly that are operating affordable housing, and of course, not having access to reliable, clean energy, being reliant on the centralized grids, which are becoming increasingly unreliable, just puts our communities at risk. And a lot of what Noah described in terms of the economic development opportunities and jobs and small business opportunities were really fueling opportunities among low-income communities, and having residents play a role in solar, building up a distributed solar infrastructure and so on. So the potential loss of these solar incentives is really troubling. I think so that, just from a environmental justice and community development standpoint, as far as what's going on globally, in Kenya, where my company, Eli Strategies, joined the Kenyan Green Building Society. They've been really pushing clean energy, and they've focused on hydro and geothermal and these centralized grids, but most communities are leapfrogging that and just going straight to the more distributed systems. So mini grids and standalone solar systems. There's a rich ecosystem very similar to what we've developed here in the US, with social entrepreneurs like D-Light providing affordable solar units in homes. 1 in 5 Kenyan households, according to the International Energy Agency, has access to solar, and this is often the family's first access to electricity are these small solar units. And there's a rich ecosystem for entrepreneurship. There's a program that I love called Solar Sister, which supports women entrepreneurs in the solar industry in Kenya, Nigeria, and they're supposed to be coming to the US or already developing something in the US. And providing economic opportunities for women, for men, for everyone, to really take part in the energy transition. And so, yeah, I would just say in terms of action items, if you have back to the USA, if you have expiring tax credits, if you have other financing within your affordable housing portfolio, those of you in the affordable housing sector, if you have buildings that need repositioning, developments that need repositioning, I urge you to reach out to Rob for just exploration on what the possibilities are. And I always throw him out there for doing extra work, but he and his team are very, very thorough. And I've worked with him on exploring solar financing schemes for affordable housing developers, and they'll walk you through all of what's possible, and including those power purchase agreements. Is that still an opportunity, Rob? You'll tell us the power purchase agreements, which can generate. Yeah.
David can go into this.
David can go into that. Okay, great. So David will go into that, and this is, it's just the solar incentives are an important part of a capital stack required to keep affordable housing available and healthy and self-sufficient as possible. So I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Thanks, Anasa. That's really great to really appreciate how you framed and made connections between how we are advancing distributed energy here and really the extent at which distributed energy around the world in Kenya has it similarly has a massive impact. At that, I'd like to transition to David Downs, who will talk about his and Catholic Charities Laudato Si initiative.
Great. Thanks, Rob. You're able to hear me? Wonderful. Rob, want to thank you for forging forth this month. It's a busy month all around. I know Noah didn't even plug the Nicaea conference coming up here in New York City. We've got a lot of different sort of actions, and then Rob, and through the conversation so far, talked about a lot of the different things that we're now racing, towards this new deadlines that we didn't necessarily have in front of us, a few weeks ago or a month ago. So I'll say that it's a mad scramble, but we are certainly as a solar developer fully vested in this effort, and appreciate sort of the overview that Noah provided on distributed energy, as well as some of the points that Anasa made just about the global perspective that we need to all I think keep in mind right now. But before we sort of try to connect all those dots and bring it back for some good question and answers from some of the participants today, I'll just introduce myself. It's David Downs. I'm with Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens. I serve dual roles within the agency here. My primary role is as an affordable housing developer across our, I see you know that we can barely hear you. I'm gonna try to switch audio real quick. Is this any better?
Try again.
Is that any better, Rob?
I think it's a little more clear.
Okay. I apologize. There's lots of action happening around me in my office today in Brooklyn Heights. So, but again, just as way of background, David Downs with Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens. We have multiple missions, primarily starting with our affordable housing portfolio, which has been in development for over 50 years now, going back to the 1970s. And in the last 5 to 6 years, we have focused on developing affordable housing with solar as a key part of enhancing our future operations for the portfolio. And just to give a really quick snapshot of how we're doing that, and sort of thinking about the larger play of distributed energy across the New York State market, which it was really nice to hear Noah comment on. It's good to be in New York State, and I agree with that perspective right now, especially sort of with the times that we're thinking about ahead. But using some of the great resources that both Rob and Noah laid out, we have used NYSERDA to develop a first phase of affordable solar retrofit projects that we called our Laudato Si phase 1. And that was really sort of a pilot to test out what the effort would take to develop affordable housing with solar. These were all existing buildings within our portfolio. And that phase, it generated about 150 kilowatts of community solar over 3 buildings. We really looked at it sort of as a baseline pilot, sort of, how could we take the first steps towards this and just understand what the challenges and opportunities are. So with that, we self-financed. We'll get into some of the more complex undertakings that we've looked at since then. But again, it was really sort of an investment on the behalf of our affordable housing balance sheet, essentially, to support this work in renewable energy, to assist the buildings, as well as to assist our residents, given that this was a community solar model. So Noah mentioned earlier, net metering. This is one where it is going back to the Con Ed grid here in New York State. And it comes back to us in the forms of energy credits for our Con Ed bills for the common area energy in those buildings, but also went back to some of our residents that signed up through a community solar initiative. And so that was, I think our first sort of foray into solar, and it gave us sort of a good overview of, the different models, the different options. It was a completely different market when we started that project in 2019. Rob and Noah, I think, reflected on the fact that the marketplace has shifted significantly. we sort of saw an upward trajectory of a lot of incentives coming from New York State, as well as from the federal level in 2022. So after completing phase one, we started to think very quickly about what would the next phase or the next generation of Laudato Si look like. And so we started working with Rob and his team in sort of the consulting capacity to look at phase two, to not only expand the work that we had already completed in phase one, but to really think about different options from a financing perspective, as well as to utilize the solar ITC or the tax credits that was available. So things with phase two that change is that we flipped to a net metering option. So all of the energy will stay with the buildings, and that's a part of the underwriting or the the positive benefit assumptions that we make. We did utilize the 30% baseline ITC, and then we also benefited from the timing of the IRA provisions that allowed for a 20% ITC bonus for affordable housing projects. So that process, going out to the time that, the announcement was made that this was, going to be new options for solar development, to the period where, all the guidance came in from the Department of Energy and from the IRS. We worked our way through that process. We gained allocations for 12 different properties or 12 buildings, and are actually now moving towards construction or installation of those sites here in 2025. So it gives you a little bit of a time frame of the trajectory that it takes. I don't know, Noah, were you going to jump in?
Well, I mean, I think you said something just kind of in passing that I want to double click on. So you got 50% of the cost of your solar projects paid for by the federal government as a non-for-profit.
We will when we file our tax filings once completed. But yes, that is the assumption. So yes, it's a very big point to pause on.
I'll just I like, it's truly incredible because so many of these tax credits are regressive, meaning they're inaccessible to nonprofits, and so you have to go through all kinds of machination to just access them with tax equity and all of this. And the IRA made the tax credits refundable with elective pay, and then you got the bonus credit on top. So that's just pretty incredible. And I think we're going to talk more, I'm sure, in the Q&A about like disappearing incentives and what they mean. But one thing when I think about the role of the NYSERDA incentive, that is the one incentive in New York State that's not based on your tax bill, that is genuinely accessible to low-income folks and to nonprofits and to affordable housing. A lot of the other incentives you really can't access. But incredible that at least for your well-timed projects, you were able to get 50% tax credit from the federal government with elective pay. Sorry to interrupt the flow. It's amazing.
No, I appreciate sort of the emphasis or the exclamation marks around that point, because working through this process over the last 3 years, we've gone from sort of having a 0% investment, now to having a 50% investment, and it changed, the entire metrics of the project, from a return on investment, when we look at phase one to phase two, just as well as, the amount of capacity that allowed us to sort of take on with that big leap going from 3 to 12 properties. And, I mentioned in my introduction that, my primary role or my full-time job is an affordable housing developer. We've added in, solar development sort of as, an auxiliary part of our mission and our goals. But we're very quickly seeing, how powerful the tool can be to really sort of, again, enhance the operations and supplement sort of the portfolio as a whole. So I appreciate that point, Noah. I'll just quickly finish up on phase three, which is sort of taking the same model that I described in phase two. We scrambled last fall to get in the final 5 allocation applications. We got those very quickly, just in terms of the timing overall and the review with the Department of Energy. And we're now working towards trying to race the clock, as Rob outlined, the timing that's necessary right now to make sure that the safe harbor rules are met and that we comply with all of the regulations that we understand as of June 12th this afternoon. So we are following this in real time, and I think very optimistic that we'll be able to keep with that. But that's not to say that there's not a lot of I think it's just general uncertainty or a lot of questions and fact checking and sort of second guessing that we've been working through over the last few months. So I think maybe that's a good place to bring in questions and answers from the group. And I'm happy to, in that discussion, talk a little bit more about the global spirit in the mission, both that Anasa talked about in her comments, as well as what Rob talked about at the beginning, given that this is really sort of reflecting not only a metric-based approach or sort of a financial pro forma to solar, but it's also thinking about the broader mission and responsibility that we as an affordable housing organization have taken on to provide, and not only to generate renewable energy and to add to that distributed energy framework here in New York State, but to also make more I think visceral connections for our residents that live in our buildings that might not otherwise have that understanding or ability to sort of actually tap into it. So I'll leave it there, Rob, and turn it over to you to moderate Q&A.
Thank you, David. And at that, we'll open it up to all the attendees. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'll go ahead and get us started. A question for David is, what has been, and you started to touch on this, but what would you say that the driving force has been to stick with solar through these evolving policies, right? You've done 3 different phases, right? Each one has had a different policy landscape, right? So why have you continued to take it from one phase to the next as the world has been changing, sometimes in front of us, sometimes what feels like beneath our feet?
It's a good question, and it's one that we have, I mentioned a little bit sort of thinking about this in dual terms of both, a financial bottom line or financial return on investment versus we'll say the sustainable mission that we framed into Laudato Si when we started the organization in 2020. And I think that's an important perspective for us as a developer, was that it was sort of a balance between the two, that it wasn't one necessarily leading the other, but that we could see that they would both sort of complement each other. And I think with that, I don't know that we foresaw the marketplace shifting as quickly as it has this year. I think we had some, early indicators that there might be changes to renewable energy, and I think our hope all along was that renewable energy, specifically solar, is sort of is something that a lot of folks I think agree upon, and that doesn't necessarily have a negative impact in any way that we can see. I think the other piece that I didn't talk about in my comments, but just that was part of our rationale internally, was trying to think about the shifting landscape of regulatory compliance here in New York City and New York State when it comes to the responsibilities that buildings carry, for their carbon emissions and in other sort of data or metrics. And right now, for example, we do not have a requirement to really comply with that requirement, given that the fact that most of our portfolio, or 100% of our portfolio, is affordable housing, and it's basically has a waiver. But that's not to say that we don't see that shifting over time, and that there would be a major shift that we would need to sort of address, similar to other local laws that are enforced here in New York City. So I think for us, it's sort of a balancing act between all three of the financing, the mission, as well as sort of the regulatory compliance piece.
Thanks, David. Here we have a question that came in. I'll put this out to you, Noah. Someone would like to hear more about the incentive programs that are in development to replace New York Sun for affordable housing developers. So, using your crystal ball, if nothing else, where do you foresee the incentive landscape going for affordable and perhaps other projects that are maybe in this sort of the low income space more largely?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's a great question. So I will say my expectation is that NYSERDA is going to continue offering incentives for solar on affordable housing, at least for a few years. And I say this based not on anything that's in writing, but based on the conversations we've been having with the Department of Public Service and with NYSERDA since the Public Service Commission issued their surprise order slashing New York's solar program budget. And again, the order that came out, it was really kind of a hatchet job. It wasn't thoughtful and didn't have the type of detail that normally you would see in a wind down of a multi-year state program that wide variety of constituencies rely upon for capital planning and that housing agencies rely on for capital planning and all of that. So there was a lot of cleanup to do after that order. And what NYSERDA has since clarified is that they have some funds that were set aside for low-income benefit projects that will remain available. We don't know how much money, and we do not know what the incentive levels will be. So we're waiting with bated breath for NYSERDA to file an updated operating plan, which I believe that they're required to file by June 23rd. So hopefully by the end of this month, we're going to have more clarity regarding what the incentives look like for solar on affordable housing, at least at the state level. And yeah, I think that's that. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Noah. I'll put you on the spot once more. Someone is asking Heather, looking forward to getting information about how to contact the New York State Senate. Do you have suggestions about how to get involved federally?
Yeah, so I can't access the chat to drop something into the chat here. It looks like I can only chat to the hosts and panelists. But I do have a phone number that if you wanted to reach out to the Senate Majority Leader today. So what I'll do, Rob, is I'll drop that into the chat here to the hosts and panelists.
We'll circulate after the call some actions that everybody can take.
Great.
I'll have to do that immediately, given the timeline of everything. There are a couple safe harbor related questions. What does safe harbor mean? Is it 5% of engineering costs or project costs? It's 5% of the total project budget, essentially. That's 5%. Frequently, project owners want to modestly exceed that 5%, because if the cost of the project goes up, you can't say, well, our project was X, now it's X plus Y, but you had 5% of X. Then you're out of luck, right? So you're better off being 6, 7, 8% of project costs to make sure you have some buffer. That's what I've read from others, and I think it's good common sense. Someone has a solar project lined up, financing, and the solar vendor. What are next steps? And a similar question, something on a project under construction, they're planning to add rooftop solar, but the project won't be done until next year. What should be done? What are those next steps? Should someone be applying for low-income community solar before August 1? Well, the easiest one is yes, get an application in federally. There's some rules you need to make sure that you're able to comply with. If you're federally regulated, do you have paperwork proving that you have light tech, for example, in place or other federal program, or are you in the process of getting that paperwork lined up? You need to submit actual paperwork. But yeah, I would absolutely apply. Happy to have a conversation about that if that's helpful. Around the safe harbor questions, then there are sort of, I think it depends on where your project is. Our general take is if a project is earlier stage, it's difficult to commit to purchasing materials because you may not know exactly what those materials should be and available components. I mean, once you have them, right? But you want to make sure that you're buying the right materials. So going through engineering costs can be one way to engineering, and incurring those costs can be one way to safe harbor. There are different ways, different methods. I think it's a little bit case specific. There are 3 different ways, big picture, to qualify, and there are lots of rules under each one. So I think I'm happy to have a big picture conversation. A lot of what we do on these issues is, as David will say, when we don't know, we're happy to say we're not lawyers, not accountants, and so we will stay within our limitations at least. But you know, there's a point when talking to counsel is important to make sure. So
I would just re-emphasize that, Rob, that you know it is a 3-way conversation again with so you know the solar consultant or whoever you're working with in that capacity. You know, we're dealing with our auditors in real time right now, where we're still trying to understand the provisions as well as counsel. So just to emphasize that you do need a robust team to guide you there.
Thanks, David. Here's another question. How are tariffs impacting the cost of solar projects?
Increasing them. I mean, I think anyone could speak to this, but the tariffs have been volatile kind of all over the map, in terms of what the level is, and it keeps changing. But I mean, it seems like things are gonna settle down, and folks are continuing to install solar. And at least for, if we're talking about multifamily projects in New York City, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think that it's had a dramatic impact on prices, because the equipment is only one portion of the cost for solar on multifamily buildings in New York City.
That's a really good point. You know, the total stack of the cost is, it's surprising that the hard cost or the panel cost or the equipment cost is not necessarily as large as you might think. And on both new constructions and retrofit projects, we have not incurred any upcharges yet from tariffs, but that's not to say that it's not forthcoming. But again, as of June 12th, we are still waiting for this to be better understood.
Thank you. Here's a somewhat related question. Do we have domestic production of panels to replace import? Is there domestic supply of components which can help to offset the impact of tariffs? Back to you.
We have more domestic supply now than ever before. And if you just think about what's in a typical solar project, a lot of the racking has already been manufactured in the United States, whether it's aluminum or steel, and that's been true for a while. We've onshored a lot of PV module manufacturing. Some of the biggest facilities are down in Georgia, and there are a lot of other plants that were planned that we'll see, if they come to fruition based on what's happening federally right now. But then another piece of this is battery energy storage. So again, a lot of projects in New York City don't include batteries because New York City's fire code generally disallows it. But for projects in other parts of the region and surrounding communities, those resilient systems that have battery energy storage, that's typically helping to qualify for domestic content because there is a lot of domestic manufacturing of batteries.
And to build off of that, then, in solar, we generally talk about the big 3, the racking, the inverter, and the module, right? As Noah said, the racking is largely domestic in most cases right now. The inverters increasingly have been onshored as well. So certainly some of the inverter companies that we work with in New York City are almost all now. Any new product coming online is coming out of a facility in Florida. And the modules, it is a bit more of a mixed bag, but usually there's increasingly there's some percentage of modules that are domestically produced. It just depends if it's the extent to which it's assembled, what components of the module may or may not be domestic vary, right? But there have been massive increases in manufacturing domestically, both due to there's a bonus tax credit for products with domestic content, as well as a tax credit specifically for manufacturing of clean energy components. So there's a whole domestic infrastructure. I think I just read the U.S. may be the third largest manufacturer of modules in the world right now. So it's been a tremendous spike, and that's really happened very quickly over the last 3-4 years at this point. Are there any final questions? Well, at that, I would like to thank our panelists. It's really been an informative conversation in a time when as I hope those who've attended can see, although there's a lot of shifting within the solar landscape, there's a lot of opportunity to capture these incentives, but also a lot of know-how that's needed to make sure that it's done right. So definitely encourage that if you're looking to take advantage of these expedited opportunities, that you make sure that you reach out to folks who have a track record of being able to get jobs done under shifting regulatory landscapes, as well as just simply the right professionals, right? That sometimes accountants, attorneys are necessary. We know they're not always the least expensive support, but certainly it's a wise investment to make sure that there's the right group of experts in the room while making these substantial long-term investments. So at that, thank you, Anasa. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, David, for your time and expertise. And we really appreciate all the attendees. We will be following up with a recording with what you can do in the New York State, what you can do federally, as well as guidance around the safe harboring that has been put out by Nixon Peabody, because it's very useful, and I think you can get a better grasp of big picture, as well as some of the weeds. When you start to go in the weeds, you understand how important it is to really get it right through a deeper dive. So have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you so much, Rob. This was a great
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you.